Every once in a while, a political leader gives a speech that is not really about policy. It is about something larger, a direction, a philosophy, a declaration of what a country is choosing to become at a moment when the old answers have stopped working and the new ones have not yet been built. Mark Carney just gave that speech in Toronto, in front of some of the most influential progressive thinkers and leaders in the world. And what he laid out was not a list of programs or a budget summary. It was a complete reimagining of what Canada is, what it is building, and why the way it builds matters just as much as what it builds. Housing, energy, trade independence, artificial intelligence, sovereign wealth. The new politics of control in an age of anxiety. Every single one of those threads connects to the same central argument, that the only real answer to the loss of control that people feel is to build, concretely, boldly, for everyone. This is the speech that defines what Carney's Canada is trying to become, and it is significantly more ambitious than most people have realized.
Now, across all our countries, I think this is safe to say, across all our countries, the same conversation is taking place at kitchen tables and factory floors and chat rooms, people feeling a loss of control. It's a conversation that's been going on for a few years. Control or loss of control over their cost of living, loss of control over who comes across their borders, loss of control, as we've just heard, over what enters their social media feed, control or loss thereof of a technology that may displace, destroy their jobs before it improves their lives.
Start here, because everything else in this speech flows from this diagnosis. Carney is identifying something that has been hiding in plain sight across the politics of almost every developed democracy for the past decade. The surface-level debates, immigration, inflation, technology, trade, all look different from each other. Different countries, different cultures, different political traditions. But underneath all of them, the same emotional core. People feel like things are happening to them rather than being shaped by them. And that feeling, that loss of agency, is the raw material from which every populist movement of the past decade has been constructed. The genius of naming it this way is that it refuses to let any single ideology claim ownership of the problem. Loss of control does not respect left or right. A factory worker worried about automation and a middle-class family that cannot afford a home, and a young person watching their social media feed spiral into anxiety are all experiencing versions of the same thing. And the politics that has thrived on this feeling has done so by offering a simple and emotionally satisfying, but ultimately false solution. Find someone to blame, tear something down, promise that destruction equals strength. Carney's argument, the argument this entire speech is built around, is that the only real answer is the opposite, not demolition, construction. Not grievance, agency, not tearing down, building up, and doing it in a way that actually gives people a stake in what gets built.
And part of that, consistent with what I just said and said in Davos, is part of the way forward is to name plainly what's broken, to say as plainly as possible how we intend to replace it, and then do the hard work of building. And I'm going to provide a few examples. Housing is unaffordable in part because we haven't been building affordable housing. I mean, it's not a tautology. We literally have not been building in this country. As Mike Moffat knows, we haven't built affordable housing for about 30 years as a class.
That line is so simple, it almost sounds obvious. Housing is unaffordable because we have not been building affordable housing. But listen to what Carney is actually doing there. He is refusing to mystify the problem. He is refusing to wrap it in complexity or ideology or partisan blame. He is stating, as plainly as language allows, that a specific failure to do a specific thing over a specific period of time produced a predictable and entirely preventable crisis. 30 years. That is not a market failure in the abstract. That is 3 decades of policy choices, municipal regulations, development charges, zoning restrictions, and political incentives that favored existing homeowners over future ones, all compounding into a situation where an entire generation of Canadians has been priced out of the kind of stability their parents took for granted. And Carney's response follows the same logic. If the problem is that Canada stopped building, the solution is to build again, at scale, at speed not seen in generations, a new public agency, factory construction technologies that cut build times in half, federal land unlocked, development charges cut in half, tax cuts on new home purchases worth up to $200,000 for buyers in Toronto alone. This is what naming the problem plainly and then replacing it looks like in practice. Not a commission, not a task force, concrete action aimed at the concrete cause of a concrete crisis.
We need to build new trade relationships in order to move from reliance to resilience. Many of our former strengths have become our vulnerabilities. But if that route is not ultimately possible, we will invest heavily in new markets and products. We'll reward those who build, buy, and produce in Canada, and we will build new partnerships abroad.
Reliance to resilience. That 4-word phrase is the most concise summary of Canada's entire economic transformation project under Carney. Because reliance and resilience look almost identical when conditions are stable. A deeply integrated continental economy that moves 85% of its goods tariff-free across one border is efficient and apparently robust, right up until the moment the political conditions on the other side of that border change dramatically. And then, reliance reveals itself as something very different from resilience. Reliance means your strength depends on someone else's choices remaining stable. Resilience means your strength holds regardless of what someone else chooses to do. Canada built reliance for decades, rationally, because the American relationship was so large and so stable that optimizing for it made complete economic sense. What the Trump era has done is expose the hidden cost of that integration, not because the integration was wrong, but because it was allowed to become so total that Canada lost the ability to credibly threaten alternatives. Carney is rebuilding that ability, deal by deal, market by market, partner by partner, moving Canada from a country that needs the American relationship to a country that chooses it, from a position of strength rather than dependency. And that single shift changes the entire geometry of every future negotiation Canada will ever have with Washington.
We are in the early days of creating a sovereign wealth fund. So when those ports get built, when that energy infrastructure gets built, when that critical mineral mine gets built, Canada, Canadians more specifically, take a slice alongside the private sector. And so for the first time in our history, Canadians will benefit directly from those economic returns.
For the first time in our history. That is not a casual phrase. It is a recognition that something fundamental has been missing from the way Canada has built its economy and distributed its wealth. Canada is about to undertake a $1 trillion investment program across energy, infrastructure, critical minerals, aerospace, and technology. That investment will create enormous economic value. It will build ports and pipelines and mines and data centers and clean energy systems that will generate returns for decades. Under the old model, those returns would flow primarily to private investors and corporations. The public would benefit indirectly through jobs and tax revenues. But the direct financial returns, the equity upside, the long-term compounding value of owning strategic national infrastructure, that would belong to shareholders, not citizens. Carney is changing that model, and he does it by invoking one of the most powerful historical analogies in Canadian memory: the Canadian Pacific Railway, the infrastructure that literally held the country together in the 19th century, a project financed in part by the federal government that generated enormous long-term wealth flowing almost entirely to private investors. Most famously, Lord Strathcona, whose name is still on buildings across the country because he captured the returns that Canadian public investment made possible. It is going to be different this time. The wealth created by public investment in national infrastructure will belong, at least in part, to Canadians, directly, through a fund they can invest in alongside the government. That is not just a financial instrument. That is a statement about who Canada is being built for.
You know, those whose politics is to destroy, to demolish, dismantle, they're not going to change their instincts. This is, in many respects, this is their moment, right? We can't match them by being timid imitations of them. We can't answer them by pining for an old order that's not going to return. It's through the crack in the bell, as Leonard Cohen said, through the rupture that the light gets in.
Through the crack in the bell. That is where the light gets in. Leonard Cohen wrote those words about rupture, about the way that what breaks open is also what allows something new to enter. And Carney choosing to close with that image is the thesis of the entire speech compressed into a single line of poetry. The old order is broken. The international rules-based system no longer functions as it once claimed to. The assumption of permanent American reliability turned out to be exactly that, an assumption. The belief that markets would solve housing produced 30 years of a housing class that was never built. The conviction that deep continental integration was the same as economic strength confused efficiency for resilience. These are the cracks in the bell. And the politics of grievance looks at those cracks and sees only damage, sees only loss, sees only someone to blame and something to tear down. What Carney is offering is a different way of seeing the same reality. The crack is where the light gets in. The rupture is the opportunity. The broken assumptions are the invitation to build something better, something more honest, something that actually delivers for the people it is supposed to serve. Big, fast, bold, not timid, not nostalgic, not destructive, building, concretely, for everyone. A country that is not just strong but good, not just prosperous but fair, not just for some most of the time, but for all Canadians all of the time. That is the Canada Carney is building. And this speech was the clearest statement yet of exactly why and exactly how.